Hello everyone, welcome to BrainCan channel, the channel about brain research. I'm Vasilisa Zhukova and today we have a very interesting topic to discuss. And this topic I've been avoiding for many years because today we will talk about memory. And there is no framework or one theory that could explain the full complexity of memory encoding in the brain. But fortunately, today I have an expert in memory studies, Professor Dr. Leo Kazachkov. He did his PhD at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the most prestigious and leading universities on the planet Earth. And currently, he's a professor at Brown University. And he is only 31 years old. Thank you, Leo, for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I also want to say it's so nice to hear someone pronounce my last name exactly correctly. It's not often. Usually, Americans stumble over it, but so it's like really pleasant. So thank you.
Basically, I have the same problem. Yes,
Yeah, I
we can
figured.
understand each other.
Yes.
So first of all, before we can discuss the beauty of your new model and your study, could you please share how is it to study and how to work in MIT?
Sure. So I did my PhD at MIT, and then I did my first postdoc at MIT. Now I'm a professor at Brown University, which is nearby. So right now
Congratulations, Professor Kozachkov.
Oh, thank you. Wow. Yeah. So this is my office at Brown. But yes, this work that you're talking about was started and mostly done at MIT when I was a postdoc there for a little bit. So yeah, so you asked me how's MIT. I mean, I loved it. It still is an awesome place. I have many friends that are still there. I still keep in contact with my advisors and collaborators. It was for me a place where everybody's working on something really exciting. Everybody's very driven. Everyone's very smart and knowledgeable. And so it's really easy to be like motivated in an environment like that. Maybe more important than that for me was I had a lot of freedom during my PhD
This is great.
right? That's like the thing you want.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so for me, that was the most important thing, along with very good advisors. And so I basically had my whole PhD to just explore and really think deeply about the things that I cared about in that environment. So yeah, for me, it's like some of the best years of my life. It was wonderful.
Honestly, Leo, you are the first person who tells me that his PhD was the best for years in his life. Usually, it's not like this.
Well,
Usually, this is an obligatory thing that you have to do under very tough conditions.
Yeah, it's so of course, I obviously know lots of people who have had very tough PhD experiences. I think I just got really lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think my advisors are just, really like wonderful people who just, yeah, gave me space, which for me was the most important thing. I don't want to sound like it was completely without stress. Of course, there was a lot of stress. I mean, like, it's
Science,
also,
yes.
yeah, it happens, right? It's science. There's ups and downs, mostly downs, but the overall experience was really
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. And MIT as a place is like, really, really liked doing my PhD there. It was really great.
So I think, yes, the main message for all directors of different research um, institutes is, if you want to create a fruitful ground for different researchers, then please focus on the ways how you build it, how people feel during work with you, if they're happy, if they have enough space for their work, and etc. Yes.
100% agree. And I think, freedom is the word. At least that's what I think. If you give smart people space to think about what they want and to work on things, good stuff will happen.
I totally agree with you. So let's start with the questions that some of our followers sent me. Since you've been working a lot with memory storage and retrieval, my first question is, what is the place in the brain where the memory is stored? Where and how does it happen?
So it's an excellent question. Very, very good question.
Yes.
But actually, the way the question is asked already puts you on the wrong path. So I'll explain why. So there isn't one place in the brain where memory is stored. There's places that seem to be more important for memory, certain brain areas, which we can talk about.
Yes, we will.
I hope. But the way memory, to the best of our knowledge, actually works is that it's what's called a distributed process. So this is as opposed to, a centralized process, where centralized would be, okay, all the memories are located in this one brain area and that's it. The way it works, we think, is that memory is stored in weights between brain cells. So when I say weights between brain cells, what I mean is, different cells in the brain communicate with one another. Of course, I know you know this. I'm saying for the.
But no, this is great that you explain such things, because yes.
Okay.
We need to talk about it. Yeah.
So we have these brain cells. Hopefully, we'll talk about different kinds of brain cells at some point.
We
but
will.
Good. So there's neurons, there's glial cells, there's all sorts of stuff, and the brain works because these cells are communicating with one another. They're passing information to one another. And the strength of the information that they're passing, roughly how much information they're passing between one another, is what we call the weight of the connection. And so memories are thought to be stored in the pattern of weights between brain cells. And this is a completely distributed thing. And so you can't just point to, one specific location and say, aha, this is the memory. It's distributed all over the connection of weights. An analogy would be something like, for example, imagine a lake. Okay. And suppose I'm dropping rocks into the lake and I'm observing the wave patterns that come from those rocks. Something very similar happens in the brain, actually. Right? Except the pattern of activity isn't waves in water, it's patterns of electrical activity in the cells, right? And so you can imagine if I now put a bunch of different structures in the lake that stick out of it, like little hills or something like that, and then I drop the rocks, I can completely change the pattern of waves. Right? So I can cause the waves to break up at certain points. I could cause them to join back together depending on where I put structures in the lake. Right? And depending on exactly how I put those structures in the lake, I can control what the activity is. Right?
And what the distribution of the initial signal is too.
Exactly. And so in some pretty concrete sense, you can think about the arrangement of patterns there as encoding a memory. right? But we wouldn't say that the memory is, it's, at this one specific place. It's distributed along the lake. It has to do with these, like the exact pattern of disturbances that I create in the lake that sculpt the eventual wave pattern.
Okay, then what do you think about different specific neurons which store very specific information? Is it an exception, or we simply didn't identify another also specific neurons? My example is that, for example, space cells or grid cells. That are the types of neurons that store the information which is specific to the environment, to the space. Actually, they encode and store spatial information. And the grid cells, they provide like a grid which helps animals, including humans, to reconstruct the map or coordinates of the space. And also we have space cells which fire specifically to during the memorization or retrieval of some information which is related to specific spaces. So this is an example when we have these very specified cell neurons. But I can't name you a lot of different neurons which would be so specified. For example, I can't name you the neuron that would store the memory specifically. I don't know, about my clothes or about my childhood when I was 10. I think we don't have such very specific neurons, right? Or what do you think about this?
Right. So I have two thoughts on that. So one thought is that, as you say, I completely agree with you. These things like grid cells, space cells, and so on are sort of the exception that proves the rule.
Yes.
So it's very hard to find cells that have such clean representations, right? In general, as you were saying, it's much more complicated to interpret what, if anything, particular cells are encoding. The second thing I would say to that is, even in the case of grid cells,
yes,
right, the information is still being encoded in the synaptic weights, in these connections between neurons in the network. It's just you're seeing them in an easily read out way in the neural firing rates or whatever, but the actual thing that determines that pattern of firing activity is in the connections between the neurons, not the neurons themselves.
This is a very important point. Yes, we need to specify here that people who study memory, they're focused on synaptic connections, and this is the connection that happens between two neurons, right? But currently, we know that not only neurons participate in this connection of two neurons. Also, there are glial cells. And one of the glial cells that participate and build the synapse are astrocytes. So could you please tell how did you come from this very neuron-centric model of memory encoding to astrocytes?
Yes. So actually, it's a bit of a funny story that takes us back some amount of years. So my background is in physics and math when I was an undergrad. And towards the end of my undergrad degree, I knew that, okay, I wasn't going to do research in theoretical physics, which is kind of what I was thinking. And the reason for that is because, first of all, there's many, many really smart people working on that topic. You need to be like a world-class mathematician. And also, you have to be okay with the prospect of your theories not being tested until, 500 years after you're gone, right? Because that's like the difference between theory and experiment. And so I was looking for problems to work on that were quantitative and interesting to me. And it was just my luck that a new professor was coming in to my undergrad institution who's a computational neuroscientist. His name's Konstantinos Mikmizos. He's still there at Rutgers doing computational neuroscience. And I took his class. I immediately fell in love. I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Because, it's the study of the brain and the mind, which I was already very interested in. And I could use the tools of math and physics, which I very much wanted to do. So after I graduated, I worked for a year in his lab. And day one, I came to his office and I said, okay, boss, I'm here. Give me a problem. What do I work on? And he said, well, nobody knows what glial cells do. I said, okay, I'll figure out what glial cells do. Of course, that was, just youthful arrogance, I guess, whatever you want to call it. But basically, the whole reason I know about glial cells, and in particular astrocytes, is because, my first advisor in computational neuroscience was like, well, nobody knows what these things do. Maybe we could study them. And so to answer your question, I actually never started in the neuron doctrine and then moved over to glial cell. I just was immediately in the glial cell land.
In a good place, because I'm also a glial person. So we are kind of like a mafia here.
Yeah.
Because I think that the majority of neuroscientists, they're still working on neurons. And this is not enough, because it's the neurons, we have billions of neurons in our brain, but it's only 50% of the cells that encode the information of the brain. And this is just a wrong concept to look only at this half of the brain.
Yes, and I completely agree. So I'll say the two things. So one, I think we need, both neurons and glial cells, which I think is also what you're saying.
And microglial cells. Okay.
Microglial cells, yes. We can go even more. But in general, yeah, neurons are extremely important. I don't want to give the impression that I'm like, let's throw out neurons. Neurons are unbelievably important, right? It's just all these things together are what is actually, making the brain do what it does. Yeah. The other thing, just, so people think we aren't like in the mafia, as you say, or like conspiracy theorists or something, is, there's a very good reason, actually, why people have focused on neurons for so long and why they haven't focused on glial cells. The reason is because electrophysiology, which is the tool that we use to study neurons, because neurons are electrically active, is hundreds of years old, right? So there's like a long history.
And this electrophysiology of the brain actually inspired mathematicians to build first computers.
Yes.
Yes, it started from the biology.
Exactly. And yes, people like McCullough Pitts, Norbert Wiener, you can go on. All the early cyberneticists, actually.
Yes.
These people were inspired by the brain. So it's very, very important and very natural why, the name of our field is called neuroscience, right? And that's because, that was the tool that we had available to study the brain picked up neurons. It turns out to study glial cells, you need to do what's called calcium imaging, which is much harder because glial cells aren't electrically active. Instead, they're little calcium computers for the most part. And so if you want to understand how they're computing, you need to basically look into the brain while it's alive and doing stuff. And you need to inject a chemical that emits light whenever it comes into contact with calcium so that you could image it. And
during the imaging, we actually we create these brain windows if we work with animals. This is the term, brain windows, exactly, to see how it happens.
And it's very challenging, as you know. It's really, really hard. It's harder than electrophysiology. But if you do it and you look at these, glial cells, they light up like Christmas trees. They're very, very active. And so, but the thing is, calcium imaging is only a few decades old, as opposed to electrophysiology, which is hundreds, so we just simply haven't had enough time to like fully flesh out our understanding of glial cells, because the tool that we use to study it is relatively new. But the number of papers is growing exponentially that studies glial cells and behavior, cognition, memory, learning, and so on. And so I think, the future is bright.
I agree with you. And moreover, we develop new technologies that could be more precise if we want to study the communication of different cells. Yes, I think we will find we will discover a lot of new things in the upcoming years, I guess.
Sure. I'm 100% sure.
So okay, and so that was your ground that you used to build dense associative memory model, right? I think we forgot to mention another important feature is that astrocytes, they have numerous different projections from their cell, and this is how they can contact simultaneously a lot of different neurons, and they can participate in the activity or in the function of multiple synapses simultaneously.
Yes,
exactly. I think this is another feature that you used when you built your model, right?
Yes, exactly. If you want, I think it would probably be helpful to explain like what a associative memory model is in the first place.
Perhaps.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'll keep it, brief and high level, but okay. So I guess let's start with the news headline. So last year, the Nobel Prize in Physics went to several people, one of whom was a guy named John Hopfield. Okay. So John Hopfield is a physicist, which makes sense, but he's also a very, very famous computational neuroscientist.
I saw him in my nightmares. Okay, you can continue.
Oh, wow. Why do you say that?
Because when I did my master, I had one discipline when I had to read lectures actually to different students, and I didn't choose topics. Actually, professors chose us, and this is how I ended up in computational neuroscience. But the thing is that I had to imagine. I didn't start to study computational neuroscience, but I had to read the lecture. And the first topic was about Hopfield networks.
Yeah, that's a bit intense.
It was intense, yes.
Yes. But the idea behind Hopfield networks is really simple and beautiful, I would argue. And basically, okay, so Hopfield invents what we now call Hopfield networks in 1982. He publishes a paper which kind of launches a whole subfield inside of computational neuroscience, which is the study of networks that have memory. And Hopfield's idea, his contribution, was to think about the process of memory as a physicist would think about a ball rolling down a hill. So what does that mean? So
like mechanics, actually. Yeah.
Things, okay? But if you think about it, so imagine for a second you have a surface of a trampoline, say, some material that you can deform. And you can put bowling balls at different places in the trampoline. And let's imagine that it's a very big trampoline, so all the bowling balls don't collapse into one thing. They kind of just sink into their respective places. Okay. So they create these kind of wells in the trampoline. So Hopfield says, okay, if I take a pebble now and I put it near one of those bowling balls, it's going to go down the divot, down into the hill or the
minimum. Yeah.
Yeah, the minimum, exactly. Yeah, it would go into the bottom of this like crevice, right, that the bowling ball has created. And it would just go there like a ball rolling down a hill, because that's, exactly what it is. And so Hopfield's idea was basically to say, well, okay, what if somehow there were a way for neural networks for me to, instead of putting a bowling ball, I can put a memory at the bottom of the trampoline in some sense. And so he says, I can think about the state of a neural network kind of in the same way that I could think about like a ball, just moving along the trampoline, right? And then, I mean, this is like a mathematical abstraction, but you can really think about it that way. And then Hopfield asked, like, well, okay, is it possible for, in the same way that I could put bowling balls in a trampoline, is it possible for me to put memories at the kind of bottom of these wells?
So is it correct, Leo, that we can imagine the brain just like a surface? It's not even surface. It has its cavities and bottoms.
Mhm.
And then we can imagine the spread of the information. And the memory basically is this information that reached this bottom and stayed there.
Yes, but I want to stress that this is a mathematical surface and a mathematical bottom. So
Yes.
yeah, so there's no like literal, there's no like literal surface
Yes,
of the brain
surface, exactly.
yeah, it's a mathematical thing. It's an abstraction, but that's, so far as we know, that's exactly the right way to think about it. And exactly as you said, so memories are things which have made their way to the bottom of these basins in the surface. And so why is that a useful perspective? So now I ask you to think about the process of, for instance, looking at half my face. Okay, if you just saw half my face, because I'm covering the other half with my hand, you wouldn't all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, Leo's cut in half, or, where did half of Leo go? You would immediately understand that, okay, like I'm here, I'm still here. And you would be able, if I asked you to maybe draw the other half of my face by, removing my hand in your mind. And so that process of undoing noise, undoing occlusions, you can think about that in exactly the same way as, a ball rolling down a hill towards a memory, which is at the bottom, right? And so what the starting position of your brain, in some sense, is like this disrupted, occluded thing, this memory. And then just the natural physics of the brain is such that it sort of, just undoes all that noise and disruption and just brings you back to the memory that you've stored there at the bottom of the basin.
So can we say in a metaphoric way that the synapse is a trap for the information?
Yes, you can say, I mean, it's literally the synapse is part of the fabric of memory, I guess, if you wanted to use like
More poetry, more mathematics.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm trying here. But you can very much think about it that way. So a single synapse does not itself encode a memory, but it forms an important part of like the set of synapses, which all together can encode the memory.
Thank you. So, but what was wrong with the previous idea? Neurons communicate, synapses. Then you decided to put astrocytes, who are basically ugly if we compare them with neurons. Why?
Yes. Okay. Great question. So there's a few things wrong with the picture of just neurons and synapses. So as we already said, as the mafia will tell you, that's not how the brain actually works. there's also glial cells. So there's a biological question here, which is, what could glial cells possibly be doing? And in particular, if you focus on this one type of glial cell, the astrocyte, you ask, what is an astrocyte doing? Okay. So there's just a fundamental basic science question that we want to answer. That's one direction. The other direction is to go back to the original Hopfield model, so just neurons and synapses, and you can ask, okay, how many memories can I reliably store and retrieve in this thing? Okay. And the answer turns out to be, if you have n neurons, where say n is 100, whatever, then the answer is you can roughly store n memories. Okay. So in that case, 100 memories. If you had 1,000 neurons, you could store 1,000 memories. 100,000, you could store 100,000 memories, so on and so forth.
But how would you decide the unity of memory? Because memories could be very different in the amount of information again. Is it a memory of the name, or it is a memory of the episode of your life, for example?
Yes, absolutely excellent question. So when we make statements like that, we being computational neuroscientists, what we mean is that you are trying to just store random patterns. And the reason why we choose random patterns is because they're easy to generate. You just pick a bunch of random numbers. And you can also use the fact that they're random to derive certain nice mathematical properties. And the third reason is that when we look at real data out there in the world, a lot of times it looks almost random or random enough. And so it's a good approximation. It's a useful thing to study. But of course, you're absolutely right that real data, so real things like, the names of friends, the faces of family, episodes of your life, whatever, this is highly non-random. But in some sense, that's like, people do think about that and there are results there, but that's even more complicated. Let's just start with like storing random.
Yes, okay.
So that's why we do that. And so we say that when we say, okay, how many memories can we store? What we're asking is, how many memories can we reliably retrieve? If we start near them, on our trampoline, we start near the bowling ball, how many bowling balls can we put in the trampoline such that we know when we start near one of them, we're going to go to the one that we were closest to, and we're not going to fly off somewhere else, or go to some completely different one. So that's the question. And the answer for classical Hopfield networks, which are just neurons and synapses, turns out to just scale proportionally with the number of neurons, okay? Which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of neurons in the brain, right? But it seems unlikely that that is the only way that memories are stored, in particular, given, how much information we could store in memories. It's not just, random patterns. It's like whole videos. And those videos have, senses associated with them, like smells and sounds and stuff like that.
Colors, yes.
Yeah. And so there's a motivation to think, for a fixed number of neurons, say 100 neurons, how do I store more than just 100 memories? So there's the biological question on the one hand, which is, what is the brain doing? And on the other hand, there's the how do I store more memories given a fixed number of neurons? So it turns out that if you start with the original Hopfield model, and then you generalize it slightly, which is actually what Hopfield himself did 10 years after the original model, to have, synapses that are more interesting. So dynamic synapses that change with time, you can improve memory storage a little bit. If you continue generalizing that, the very next thing that's almost suggested mathematically, like it follows very, very naturally from these two previous works, is to have your synapses be able to communicate with one another in more or less a direct way. Okay. And this is something that is not allowed in classical neural networks. Just neurons and synapses, forbidden. Because if you think about what a synapse is, it's just the connection between two neurons. But a synapse sitting over here cannot talk directly with a synapse over here. It has to somehow go through the other neurons in the network. And so mathematically, what's suggested by this theory of Hopfield networks and stuff, if you want to increase the memory capacity, then what you need to do is to allow synapses to share information with one another directly. It just follows.
It's a very I think right idea, and it even can grow in other different directions, because I know that people who are working with the model of consciousness, and they are they also have concerns about this classical neuron-centric model, because from that field, it's very difficult to model the speed of communication, which happens especially from very distant regions in the brain. And this is how actually one people proposed the model of quantum brain, or quantum model of consciousness. But I have again some questions about this model, and I would say that actually glial cells could fill the gap about the speed of communication, because they are placed just spatially between different neurons, and they contact multiple synapses simultaneously, and this is how I guess they can answer this question about the speed of communication, and the communication between distant synapses.
Exactly. And I mean, when you look at the biology now of, say, an astrocyte, that's exactly what seems to be happening. You have as you said earlier, you have a single astrocyte, and it sends out a bunch of these tentacle-like things, which we call processes. It's a bad name, but that's just what they're called. And basically, if you look at the calcium dynamics inside of those processes, you can see that basically the astrocyte is sending signals from one process to the other.
Okay.
And each process is associated with a single synapse. And so you can interpret the astrocyte as kind of, a vehicle for synapses to communicate with one another through calcium dynamics in the astrocyte.
What is the result of the model that you built, putting together neurons and astrocytes?
So for our model, you can, just like in the classical Hopfield network, you can analyze mathematically how many memories this network can reliably store and retrieve. And so whereas in a classical Hopfield model, you could only store roughly n memories, where n is the number of neurons, in our model, you could store n cubed memories. N cubed is a big number.
Yes.
So, it's like n times n times n, right? So if n is already very large, n cubed is very, very large. And so we can store a much larger number of memories given a fixed number of neurons. And the way that that works, just, so people think it isn't magic or I'm lying or something like that. Basically, the way that it works is that what's different is that when we include the astrocyte, basically we're saying that, that each synapse has a weight to every other synapse through this astrocyte. And it's that big network of communication between every synapse that increases the memory capacity of this thing. Of course, maybe someone watching this is a biologist and they're saying, okay, like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, because of course, every synapse can't communicate with every other synapse with a unique weight through the astrocyte. And that's totally right. So we also looked at cases where, only a fraction of synapses communicate with a fraction of other synapses. And we understand how to deal with that mathematically. The answer basically remains unchanged, except for some, prefactors in some equations. But the idea is essentially the same, which is that if you allow synapses, even a small fraction of synapses, to share information with one another directly through glial cells, it greatly boosts the performance, the information processing capacity, if you want, of your network.
Thank you very much. But we've been talking about the storage of the memory, but you also you are working with memory retrieval.
Yes.
Which is principally a different process. Can you use the same model to explain the memory retrieval, or how does it work?
Yes. So our model does both storage and retrieval. The way storage works is that you update the weights in your model. So we have, I can go into how that's done, but basically we have an equation, which is like a very clear generalization of the original Hopfield equations for setting the weights in our model such that the memories are stored in there. The retrieval and I should say, like, when we store memories, that's analogous to going back to the trampoline analogy. That's exactly the same as, putting bowling balls in the trampoline.
Mm-hmm.
So that's storage.
Mm-hmm.
Retrieval is, in the trampoline example, retrieval is when, I put a pebble near a bowling ball and then just let it go. Just let physics take over. So it's very much the same thing for the brain or for neural networks. Retrieval is done through the dynamics of the brain. So the physics of the brain, if you want, right? So, all like your brain's constantly spiking and has all these, interesting like EEG activity, whatever. So if you write those things down in equations and you just kind of let them go, that itself is the retrieval process. And this is like the central idea that Hopfield had, back in the day, in the 80s. Actually, it turns out other people have had it before, but that's a separate topic.
Wow.
But, yeah. Well, okay. I'd be remiss if I didn't say at least one word about it. So there is a Japanese scientist who's kind of one of my intellectual heroes. His name's Shun'ichi Amari.
Okay.
He's a very, very well-respected, very well-known, mathematician and computational neuroscientist. And he, in the 70s, had pretty much all of these ideas already written down.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't get credit for them for one reason or another. It could just, by the way, very well be that like Hopfield didn't know about about Amari's papers and so on. But it is true actually that, Amari had all the ideas that I'm talking about, not the astrocytes, but the associative memory.
The mathematical surface which resembles the distribution of information with the memory encoding and storage. So, okay, then does it mean that if we want to retrieve or if we want to recall a memory, the information needs to follow a specific track, right, in the brain to find and to retrieve this memory?
Yes.
And does it mean that if we again come back to this surface, mathematical surface, that each memory has its specific, I would say the change of the surface, and that's why each flow of the information can find a specific track?
Yes, exactly right. Another, excellent question. Actually, nobody has any idea how that process works. So it's a really, really good question. So it's the way we think about it in associative memory modeling is we basically just start from the point where, okay, you're already near the memory. Okay. Right. But nobody knows. And I really mean nobody knows. Like, it's an open question, how do you actually get the brain to be, okay, very near to memory in the first place? It's a very tough question. Because you're saying you need to drive the brain to like a particular state somehow. Mm-hmm. At whatever state you drive the brain to needs to be close to this memory anyway. It's basically a control theory problem, actually. That's what makes it so hard. I could go into more detail on why.
Yes, could you please develop this idea?
Okay, so to give you some idea of why it's hard, the brain is nonlinear. So there's two types of dynamical systems.
In the case you forgot, the brain is nonlinear.
Yeah. Well, a lot of
not the surface.
Yeah, but that's important, right? Because for linear systems, we actually have a complete mathematical theory of what it takes to drive a linear dynamical system to a particular state. Mm-hmm. So if you want to Google keywords, you could Google things like controllability. So these are really precise mathematical concepts, like things that I would teach in an engineering class to undergrads. These are like really well understood things. Mm-hmm. But there's really no such analogous idea for nonlinear systems. Mm-hmm. So in other words, for a given nonlinear system, there's no general recipe for, I say, okay, here's a nonlinear system, drive it to this particular state. There's no general recipe for doing that. So it's a very challenging problem. Whereas for linear systems, there is a general recipe for doing that, so no issue there. But of course, the brain is a nonlinear dynamical system. And so it's very hard in general to say, okay, this is how you drive the brain to be close to, a memory or something like
From
that.
A state to the state B. Okay,
Exactly.
there is no a line, a direct line from A to B, but somehow the information finds the right track.
Somehow the brain knows how to do this. It's one of like the most amazing things. Yes.
Okay, then I have a couple of completely different questions.
Sure.
But still about memory.
Okay.
So we talked about the recalling of the memory retrieval, but how does forgetting happen? How do people forget?
Yeah. So this is, I think, really not understood, even though in some sense I would argue that forgetting is just as important as remembering.
Yes.
Like it's very, very important. And the reason why I think it's important, because when we think about what intelligence is to begin with, intelligence is some kind of compression, right? You take the world in all its beautiful variety and details and stuff like that, and you compress details about it, right? But another word for compression is just forgetting, right? So
yes, I agree with you.
You just forget irrelevant details. So it's very, very important, I think, to understand how this is done, but it's not as well studied. So I can only really give you a high level answer how I think it's done. And basically it's done.
Yes, please.
Well, I think it's kind of just done as a reverse process of remembering, right? Because remembering is, we think, just another way to talk about synapses being updated, right? So we're modifying the weights between neurons or between glial cells or whatever, right? So we're changing that weight, or those weights, I should say, there's many of them, in a way that encodes a memory. And similarly, if I make a change to all those weights that isn't designed to encode a particular memory, then we're going to forget, right? Just intuitively. And the interesting, so that is actually well understood. So the keyword to look at, it kind of sounds scary, but if you Google something called catastrophic forgetting, you'll see that people have been studying this topic in computational neuroscience literally since the 80s, like around the time of Hopfield. Basically, it's the idea behind that is, you store a memory in your synaptic weights. If you want to store a second memory, you might risk overriding the first memory that you stored. And so this is called catastrophic forgetting for the obvious reason, because you're forgetting the initial memory. Catastrophic because you don't want it, so it's bad, right? But there's types of forgetting which are not catastrophic, which are actually, more like compression and, beneficial for us. Those are not understood, but they almost certainly happen through a similar mechanism as remembering, which is, you're modifying the connections between brain cells. But I think it's a really beautiful, beautiful question, how the brain does, beneficial forgetting.
And we need forget, and this is also essential, even if we want to defense our memories, because we also can have quite traumatic memories. And this is what also people experience with different traumatic memories, that they try to vanish them.
Exactly. And if you think, okay, God forbid you have some trauma in childhood or something like that, right? In some sense, the best thing that can happen, right, is you forget it, assuming, you can move on with your life and all of that, and there's no issue. But in general, the reason why we don't tend to remember most things from our childhood is because the probability that they're useful for us now in adulthood is very low. So what happens with trauma, why people tend to remember, is because the brain, something bad happens to you. And, if it's really, really bad, then the brain will say, oh my gosh, I need to be on high alert for this for the rest of my life. This could be really, really bad. And so we hold on to that because the brain just thinks it was, came to us through evolution to just latch on to danger, right? So it remembers that bad pattern because it thinks that, maybe it's going to come up again. But the vast majority of things in most cases are the brain's just like, okay, like the chance that that's going to be useful to me is very, very low. Just forget it, and that clears the way for more memories in adulthood.
I also wanted to add, because I received another question from the auditor, the question is why I don't remember my memories when I was 2 years old or something like this. Because this is usually what happens. Usually people can remember something starting from the age when they were around 5, 4, something like this. And this is absolutely normal. And it's linked to the anatomy of the brain, to the development of the brain. And today, Leo, we are fantastic people with you today because we've been talking about memory as avoiding a word hippocampus. But this is, yes, did you notice this?
I did,
but
yes.
This is, so Leo actually explained that memories are distributed in the brain, but we have different areas in the brain that help to encode the first input of the information, that help to distribute this information across different areas. And some areas of the brain are linked to the episodic memory, some of them to emotional memory, and etc. So there are different areas that specializes on different types of memories. But altogether, they are centered around hippocampus.
Yes.
This is a very important structure in the brain for memory. And the thing is that children at this early age, they don't have properly developed hippocampus. So this is why we can't remember what happened to us when we were really infants or a bit later. There is no mystery, it's just anatomy.
Yes, but it also, it makes sense from like a developmental perspective as well, right? Because when we're that young, in the typical case, our parents are still taking care of everything for us, right? And everything is given to us. We don't actually have to like go out into the world and try to do something, right? But as you get older, the evolution thinks, quote unquote, that okay, now I'm going to go out and I'm going to start foraging for myself and figuring stuff out and exploring. And it says, well, these things might be important
for the survival in general. Yes,
exactly. And so that's why at the very beginning, the brain, is not even bothering trying to store stuff because, okay, we're not doing anything anyway. It's all handed to us. And that's going to go away at some point in adulthood. So there's no point.
The last question before the end, but you are so precious guest. I'm so happy that I meet you today.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So one of them, I read in the discussion in the paper about this model that this model is a very good background for building so-called neuromorphic computation or the way how we could upgrade artificial intelligence to make it more human-like, right? Because we would use more biological information, right? Biological structure if we want to build a new level of artificial intelligence. So something like this, right? Why do you want to upgrade the artificial intelligence? Why do you want to make it more human-like?
So this is something that several groups I know are working on now. The main motivation comes from thinking about the brain as a machine that uses electricity. So the brain uses roughly 20 watts. Okay, that's enough to power that light bulb behind you. Okay, but you think about what the brain does and compare it to what that light bulb does, and one's a little more complicated and interesting than the other one, And so the question is, why is the brain so efficient with energy? How is it so efficient with energy? And one idea that people had is that, okay, it must be the fact that brains compute with spikes, right? These ones or zeros, because they're kind of very like efficient with their activity. If you think about it, if you just go back to this neuron-centric point of view, basically a neuron is sitting there and it's getting input from other neurons. And only if a certain threshold is reached, only if it gets enough activity from enough neurons, it'll let out one little blip, It'll be like, okay, I spike. You know,
Yes,
the
exactly.
time it's sitting there quietly, it's not saying anything. It's okay, I spike. You know, whereas if you think of, you know, say a transistor in your computer, it's on like all the time, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
has to, you have to maintain a state all the time, and that takes energy. And so people want to build so-called neuromorphic chips because at least the brain is much, much more energy efficient than the computers we currently have. And of course, AI is running on the computers we currently have. It's extremely power hungry. I mean, that's why companies like Microsoft and so on are trying to build data centers next to nuclear power plants, right? Because they have insane power demands. But you know, the brain again is just 20 watts. And so that's like the very high level motivation for trying to build things like neuromorphic chips and so on. And so the idea with that comment that you just read from our paper is, you know, if you have a fixed number of neurons on a neuromorphic chip, what can you add to that neuromorphic chip to like increase the computational capacity? And moreover, how do you do it in a way that's actually implementable on a neuromorphic chip? You have to be able to like, you know, connect resistors and, you know, like capacitors and inductors and all this sorts of things on a real chip to get the dynamics, to get the computation rather. And our paper, because it takes this like dynamical systems approach, it can directly be implemented on neuromorphic hardware. And so potentially, I mean, groups are exploring this now, but yeah, it could be a way to like boost the computational capacity, if you want, of neuromorphic chips.
So, and the result is that when people try to merge the intelligence, the biological intelligence with the artificial intelligence, they do it not because they want to destroy the humanity, but because they want to save the energy
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
the planet.
Yes. Yeah, I guess I should have said that's an excellent point. I should have said, I mean, like AI is out of the bag, right? I mean, it's a
Yes,
force of nature now. Like many countries across planet Earth are all racing to build like more powerful AIs. This isn't going away, right? So the question is, you know, at least how do we, you know, avoid destroying the planet in terms of energy consumption while we're building AI, right? So
exactly.
I just start from the point that this is the cat's out of the bag, no one's stopping. And so how do we, given that no one's stopping, how do we make things better for planet Earth potentially as we're doing it?
Yes, thank you very much, Leo. So, and usually I ask people to name three the most important things which help them in their life to succeed both in science and just personally. What would you name? Like three, maybe concepts, maybe just things that are valuable for you.
I see. You're asking like scientifically, not like personally.
You can combine if you want, because I
Okay.
think like science can't be without personality in a vacuum, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think so for me, like I'm a musician, so that's my big hobby, you know, and I've been doing that since I was a little kid.
Oh, me
Um,
too.
oh, really? What do you play?
Yes, I play the harp and I play solo concerts. So I sometimes I
Wow,
have tours. Yes, exactly.
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm a guitarist. So yeah, I play both like acoustic and electric. I played with bands since I was 12 and so on, you know. But for me, it's like I'm sure you can relate to this. It's the way I can relax and think about stuff, right? In a kind of more like free form way, as opposed to just sitting there with pen and paper and deriving everything. So when I'm playing
Same.
music, my brain just shuts off, but it's something still working in the background. But it like, you know, it's just very pleasant for me. So I think having a hobby like that throughout my life has really made like, you know, all the difference. Um, I would also say, I mean, honestly, like going back to science, like dynamical systems theory
Mm-hmm.
as a whole, like the idea starting with Isaac Newton, I mean, I know it's pretentious a little bit to say, okay, Isaac Newton like inspired me, but like, the idea of Newton's work, like why it was so revolutionary is because he showed that like to describe nature, you don't have to write down functions directly for, say the position of planets in the sky. You can write down functions which describe the change of position of the planets in the sky. So this is the idea behind like differential equations or dynamical systems. And for me, that's one of probably the most revolutionary idea that a human has ever come up with. It's one that's like turned out to be unbelievably fruitful for literally every field of science and math. And it's one for me personally that I just like latched onto early on. And I kind of see the world and everything I do in science through a dynamical systems lens. So yeah, I think like scientifically dynamical systems theory, that's like the most important thing I've studied and I, help work on. And then I guess, yeah, I mean, the third thing is, of course, friends and family. You should like, always try to relax outside of doing science or else it's, very hard. So I think it's important to, have a good hobby like music or painting or something like that, have good relationships with friends and family, and also to find like a particular area of science that you love. For me, it's dynamical systems and, using it to study the brain and AI and stuff like that.
This is great. Thank you very much, Leo.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to do this.
Thank you.